Admiral Korath stood before the massive holographic display, his four eyes blinking in sequence as the tactical simulation completed its final calculations. The Valkyrie War Council watched in silence as blue and red markers moved across the three-dimensional map of the Helix Nebula. Every possible human response had been calculated. Every fleet movement had been predicted. The simulation showed a 97% probability of total human defeat within 6 standard cycles. "The humans have no logical escape," Korath announced, his voice carrying the cold certainty that had made him the most feared admiral in the Valkyrie Dominion. "Their supply lines are severed. Their reinforcements are 3 weeks away. Their flagship is damaged beyond combat capability. The simulation confirms what any rational species would do. They will surrender." The council members nodded their elongated heads in agreement. The Valkyrie had conquered 32 species using these same simulations. The mathematical models had never failed. Every species, when faced with certain destruction, chose survival. It was the logical choice. It was the only choice. Commander Yethis, the youngest member of the War Council, raised a tentative question. "Admiral, what if the humans do not surrender? What if they choose to fight despite the impossible odds?" Korath made a dismissive gesture with his upper arms. "The simulation accounts for irrational behavior within acceptable parameters. Even the most primitive species we have encountered understood basic survival mathematics. The humans are advanced enough to build starships. They are advanced enough to understand when they have lost." The simulation had been running for 18 standard hours. It had processed over 4 billion possible scenarios. It had analyzed every recorded human military engagement in their brief history among the stars. The conclusion was always the same. When faced with extinction-level odds, humans would choose the logical path. They would surrender, negotiate, and accept defeat. What the simulation could not process was the conversation happening aboard the damaged human flagship Unconquered at that very moment. Captain Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of her crippled vessel, looking at the faces of her crew. The ship's main engines were offline. Life support was running on backup power. They had exactly 7 torpedoes left and barely enough energy to fire them. The Valkyrie fleet of 400 warships surrounded them completely. There was no escape. There was no rescue coming. "The aliens are demanding our surrender," Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb reported from the communications station. "They're offering fair treatment of prisoners. They seem genuinely confused about why we haven't responded." Chun looked at the tactical display showing the overwhelming enemy force. Any computer would tell her to surrender. Any logical analysis would conclude that fighting was pointless. But Sarah Chun was not a computer, and she had never been particularly good at accepting what others told her was logical. "How many civilians did they kill at New Helsinki?" she asked quietly. The bridge fell silent. New Helsinki had been a farming colony of 40,000 people. The Valkyrie had arrived and demanded their immediate surrender. The colonists had complied. They had been logical. They had done exactly what the simulations predicted. The Valkyrie had killed them anyway, harvesting their biological matter for fuel. "All of them, Captain," Webb answered. Chun nodded slowly. "And at Proxima Station? They surrendered too, didn't they?" "Yes, Captain. The Valkyrie executed everyone over the age of 20. They said the older humans were too difficult to reprogram. So surrender means death." "Fighting means death," Chun smiled grimly. "Seems like an easy choice to me." Chief Engineer Rodriguez spoke up from his station. "Captain, if we redirect all remaining power to weapons, we might be able to take out their flagship before they destroy us. Their admiral is aboard that vessel. The simulation would call that illogical," Chun observed. "We cannot win the battle. Killing their admiral will not save us. It will not save humanity. It will only delay their invasion by a few weeks while they choose a new commander." "Yes, Captain. It would be completely pointless from a tactical perspective." Chun grinned, and there was something fierce in her expression that no Valkyrie simulation could ever understand. Then let's do it. Because if there's one thing I've learned about our species, it's that we're absolutely terrible at being logical. Aboard the Valkyrie flagship, Admiral Korath received the report that the human vessel was powering up its weapons. He checked the simulation again. The probability of human attack was listed at 0.3%. The humans had to know they could not win. They had to understand that fighting would accomplish nothing. Why would any rational being choose meaningless death over potential survival? They must be bluffing, Korath concluded. They are hoping we will offer better surrender terms. Increase our demands and give them a final deadline. The ultimatum was transmitted. The humans had 1 hour to surrender or face immediate destruction. Korath settled back in his command chair, confident that logic would prevail. The humans were strange creatures, but they could not be so irrational as to throw away their lives for nothing. 57 minutes later, every weapon on the Unconquered fired at once. The first torpedo struck the Valkyrie flagship's shield generator. It was a lucky shot, or perhaps Chun had simply studied the enemy ship designs more carefully than anyone expected. The explosion created a momentary gap in the protective field. The second and third torpedoes followed immediately, slamming into the flagship's primary hull. Korath stared at his tactical display in disbelief as alarms screamed throughout his ship. This is impossible. The simulation predicted surrender. Why are they attacking? They cannot win. The fourth and fifth torpedoes struck the engine section. The flagship shuddered violently. Power systems began failing throughout the vessel. "Admiral, we are losing structural integrity," his first officer screamed. But the simulation, Korath could not understand. He had followed the mathematics perfectly. The humans should have surrendered. They should have accepted the logical outcome. The sixth torpedo destroyed the flagship's bridge. Admiral Korath died never understanding why the humans had chosen to fight. His last thoughts were of confusion and disbelief. The simulation had been perfect. The logic had been flawless. The humans had simply refused to accept it. The Unconquered survived for another 37 seconds before being destroyed by the remaining Valkyrie fleet. Captain Chun and her entire crew died in the explosion. From a tactical perspective, their sacrifice had accomplished nothing. But the recordings of the battle reached human space 2 weeks later. The new Valkyrie admiral, a cautious commander named Drethys, prepared for the next phase of the invasion. He ran his own simulations, incorporating the strange behavior of the Unconquered. The models adjusted slightly, but still predicted human surrender at key strategic points. The mathematics had been updated. Logic would prevail eventually. Drethys never got to test his simulations. When the Valkyrie fleet arrived at the human colony of New Shanghai, they expected desperate defenders willing to negotiate. Instead, they found a population that had armed every man, woman, and child with whatever weapons they could find. "Surrender, and you will be treated fairly," Drethys transmitted, reciting the standard offer. The response came from an elderly woman who appeared to be the colony's leader. "We heard about New Helsinki. We know what your fair treatment looks like. You want this planet? You can have it. But you'll have to kill every single one of us first." The simulation predicted a 2.1% chance of unified resistance. The entire population fighting would be irrational. Many would die who could have survived through surrender. The mathematics were clear. The humans of New Shanghai fought anyway. The battle lasted 11 days. The Valkyrie won eventually, but they lost 63 ships and over 12,000 soldiers, taking a colony that should have surrendered without a fight. The survivors were executed, but their defiance spread through human space like wildfire. Admiral Drethys updated his simulations again. The probability of irrational resistance increased to 15%. Still manageable. Still predictable within acceptable parameters. He was wrong. At every colony, at every station, at every outpost, the humans fought. They fought when they were outnumbered. They fought when they had no weapons. They fought when victory was impossible and death was certain. They fought not because they believed they could win, but because they refused to accept any alternative. The Valkyrie simulations could not process this behavior. The models kept predicting surrender, and the humans kept fighting. Each update to the tactical systems only created new predictions that failed equally badly. Commander Yethis, now promoted after the death of Admiral Drethis at the Battle of Harmony Station, tried to explain the problem to the War Council. The simulations assumed that all species prioritize survival above other considerations. Humans do not. They will die for abstract concepts like honor, revenge, and spite. They will sacrifice themselves to inspire others. They will choose annihilation over submission. Our models cannot account for beings who consider death preferable to certain forms of survival. The council members struggled to understand. How could any species evolve with such self-destructive tendencies? How could beings who refuse to accept illogical outcomes ever build a civilization? What they failed to understand was that these same illogical tendencies were why humans had conquered their own planet. Early humans had faced extinction countless times. They had fought predators larger and stronger than themselves. They had survived ice ages and plagues and disasters that should have wiped them out. They had succeeded not because they accepted logical outcomes, but because they refused to. The human counterattack began 6 months later. The Valkyrie had never updated their simulations to account for humans building ships in secret while publicly appearing defeated. They had never considered that humans would sacrifice entire colonies as distractions while their real fleet assembled in hidden locations. They had never imagined that a species facing extinction would divide its forces, weakening its own position, simply to strike at the enemy from an unexpected direction. The Battle of the Helix Nebula was supposed to be the final human defeat. Instead, it became the turning point of the war. The human fleet was smaller and less advanced than the Valkyrie Armada. The simulations gave them a 3% chance of victory. But the humans had spent 6 months studying their enemy. They had learned that the Valkyrie relied completely on their tactical predictions. They had discovered that when the simulations failed, the alien commanders became paralyzed with indecision. So the humans did everything the simulations said they would not do. They attacked supply ships instead of warships. They retreated when they were winning and advanced when they were losing. They used damaged vessels as weapons, ramming them into enemy formations. They broadcast surrender signals while charging at full speed. The Valkyrie commanders watched in helpless confusion as their beautiful simulations crumbled into chaos. When the battle finally ended, the human fleet had lost 60% of its ships. The Valkyrie had lost everything. The war continued for another 3 years, but the outcome was never in doubt. The Valkyrie had built their entire military strategy around predictions that humans would behave rationally. When the humans refused, the Valkyrie had no alternative approach. The final simulation, run by the last Valkyrie commander before his surrender, calculated a 0% chance of human victory. He was looking at that display when the human ambassador arrived to accept his defeat. "Your simulation says we cannot win," Commander Yethis observed wearily. "It has always said we could not win. How did you do it?" The human ambassador, a scarred veteran who had survived the destruction of New Shanghai, smiled grimly. "Your simulations assume we would accept logical outcomes. We never did. We never will. You cannot predict what a species will do when they refuse to accept that anything is impossible." Yethis stared at the prediction of human defeat on his screen, then at the victorious human standing before him. "Illogical," he whispered. "Completely," the human agreed. "That's what makes us dangerous." The Valkyrie Dominion fell 7 months later. Their simulations predicted survival through negotiation. The humans let them surrender. Unlike the Valkyrie, they kept their promises, but they never forgot what logical outcomes had cost them. And they made certain no species in the galaxy ever tried to predict their behavior again.